Woo! How are you guys today? More enthusiasm. Come on, you're awake. It happened. You made it. Thank you. Welcome to SIGGRAPH 2015 production sessions, part of the Computer Animation Festival. My name is Royce Anthony. I'm the production sessions chair this year, and my crew, Emily Hsu, Jim Haggerty, Nathaniel Peters, and next year's chair of production sessions, Mickey Rose, are pleased to bring this show together for you. Our generous sponsors have gifted some equipment and some people's time during their regular work year. They do have full-time jobs in order to be able to help pull these shows together for you. So big round of applause for our sponsors, if we could. Thank you. So we're going to be taking a look at the internal production process of a company, and really what we're trying to do is impart knowledge and share kind of innovations in film and visual effects, but it is their intellectual property. So please do not record this session in any way. Do not take any photography. We are getting a little peek inside, so let's just honor that and use our cameras in our head, our brains, to remember the session as opposed to taking photographs and videos. So with that, Image Engine presents Breathing Life into Chappie. Chris Harvey, Matthias Latour, Earl Fass, and Mark Wendell. Thank you.
They switch over?
Okay. Good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck, sir.
Thank you. So, welcome. Hopefully you guys have seen the movie. If you haven't, quick warning, huge spoilers, obviously, in this talk. But in case it's been a while since you've watched the movie, we'll just do sort of a quick sizzle reel. And also, I want to say thank you to Sony, MRC, for giving permission to show some of this stuff, and also obviously Neil Blomkamp, the director of the film, for supporting us and doing this talk. So we'll just jump into the sizzle reel. So this is Breathing Life into Chappie. Just to elaborate a little bit more quickly on some of the introductions, Matthias is the look development lead, Earl, one of our animation leads, and Mark was the CG supervisor. And myself, I was the visual effects supervisor, both in the facility and also overall for the production, which was a pretty awesome opportunity. So I'm going to try to give a very quick sort of rip through of the production, and then these guys are really going to dive deeper into the sort of some of the technical aspects of how it was created. The show itself, 1,300 shots plus. About 1,000 of those were specifically Hero Robot shots, which were handled all in Image Engine, which was roughly 70 minutes of screen time of sort of a hero character. There were a couple other vendors on the show, Olin, the Embassy, and Incessant Rain that did some other material. Our crew size, Image Engine, roughly 100-ish, give or take a few during different points in production. And we ran from March 2013 all the way to January 2015, which sounds really long. But I'll kind of explain why that was. And really, the reason for that was a little bit unique. We got in very, very early into the design phase of Chappie. You can see some of the stats of Chappie here. Incredibly complicated asset that we had to build. And Neil really wanted to approach it differently than he has on other films or is typically traditional, where if you have a practical prop, visual effects just comes in and has to match it. Instead, he wanted us to get in, at the very, very early stages so that we could really flesh things out, sort of so we knew what was going to work for us. We'll spend most of today talking about Chappie, but just because he was pretty cool, we did do another very large asset, which effectively was the same process as Chappie, except that there was no gray suit people that performed him, and he was an even bigger asset. And he had to go to the same sort of level of fidelity. So how did we get there? How did we build Chappie? Started with concept art, which is where most assets start from. Neil had been working for months with some of these guys from Weta Workshop. Absolutely phenomenal concept artists, and went through hundreds and hundreds of designs. These designs would then, once they kind of got to a more signed off level, came over to us at Image Engine. So that we could start analyzing these and building the CG asset. And we actually took the asset all the way to model final prior to shooting. And the reason we had to do that was that model then had to go back to Weta Workshop, who fabricated, 3D printed, CNC milled our 3D asset, so that the assets that were on set for production were literally a one-to-one exact match of what our digital assets were going to be. So once we got that stuff, one of the first things we had to do was studying Charlton and the Chappie concept art and start blocking out the volumes, which is with the video you see here. And we had to make some adjustments because it was really important that those things lined up. Charlton was going to be performing Chappie on, in front of the camera so that Neil could just direct him, get the performance he wanted. But we had to know it was going to translate. And for that to happen, we had to make sure that all the joint positions were going to line up. His volumes were very close. We even had Weta Workshop create sort of a chest piece and harness to map out that volume using a motocross armor, actually. So that chest piece gave the same volume so that it would restrict his movement, for one, like the arms, and also the other cast members, if they were touching him, they'd interact in the right space. And then we had to start analyzing locomotion, because it couldn't just look cool, it had to move right. And by move right, it was pretty key, both for myself and for Neil, that we wanted to limit what we called cheating with ball joints, and really get into some very intricate mechanics on how everything worked. And knowing that Charlton's performance would then map into Chappie's, and have sort of the organic fluidness, but at the same time have a very mechanical sense. So everything had to structurally really work, and there was a long back and forth between modeling and rigging, trimming surfaces and making sure that things wouldn't crash or collide through each other. And he actually had the correct range of motion to mimic what Charlton was going to be doing on set. And it was very, very involved. We had to write a lot of new tools just to get that done. Once we kind of figured out that range of motion and everything else, we effectively built an armature that went over to Weta Workshop so that they knew what they would have to work with in building the prop. And all of the different joint axes, and everything was a very complex jointing system. We'd break axes all along the joint, so it wasn't a single sort of ball joint that could move in all three axes, that it would be separated along them. And then obviously, a collection of real-life references is pretty important. With Neil, everything has to be grounded in reality, and I think it's a good practice that when you're designing something like this, it's not real, but at the same time, you want it to be grounded on something. So literally every single piece of Chappie comes from some kind of a design somewhere in the real world. And not just randomly picking parts, but really detailed by functionality. So, a lot of detail went into Chappie, and everything had a purpose and a function. The stuff along his chin bar or chin was all different sensor arrays. Each jointing system was very, very blocked out. And just a lot of time and study going into this. I think we've spent about at least 4 months just going through this early design phase of mapping how everything worked out. There was a lot of internal components underneath the armor because we knew that Chappie was going to get damaged and we'd have to reveal these different things. And it had to feel like structurally it was functional and not way in the future, but something that was relatively, parts that you could maybe imagine was being built in today's world. And then, kind of once we figured that out, we started this process back and forth with Weta Workshop because, again, they had to build this thing. And we had to start passing pieces off piecemeal because we couldn't wait till we got the full asset. There wouldn't have been enough time for them to build 12 of these things and ship them out down to South Africa and actually be on set in time. So, once we got the leg locked, we'd send the leg off or the arm. And here's an example of an early test, of their arm. We'd sent the arm off, and all our armatures, and then they fabricated this thing. And incredibly exciting to start seeing this stuff come back and this sort of two-way communication that we had between the practical and the digital. They'd give notes back, structurally this thing's too thin or this screw is too small, it wouldn't work in real manufacturing. And so that real sense of manufacturing would go back and forth. We really couldn't have. There were no bruised egos. Everyone was very, very working together on it, which was really cool. So then, all that pre-production stuff gets done, and we head down to SA, and we start getting into production. Meanwhile, back obviously at the facility, the guys are still cranking on the assets because we did the model, and then it went to Weta. Weta did the surfacing using real materials, and then we would have to get that back in, and you'll hear Matthias talk a lot about that. And we had a bunch of new development. Looking small team efficiencies. Again, Mark's going to cover a lot of that in terms of how are we going to do this thing. We needed to prep it so that when we get back from shoot, we hit the ground running. And I spent a lot of time up, midnight, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. with the time difference, Skyping back with the guys and a few 24-hour trips back and forth to check back in on the facility. The team on set, we actually only had 5 of us for the visual effects team on set, very tiny team. But really the entire atmosphere of working on this film with Neil was incredible. Neil really he likes to work with sort of the same people again and again. He really builds relationships. So the whole team, which you can see there on set, was really just kind of a big family. And it was a really incredible camaraderie that was built. So Neil shoots fast, ridiculously fast. The slides flashing down underneath are actually sort of a 30-second, 60-day tour of every single location that we shot on. The whole film was shot on location. There were no green screens, there were no stages. And I don't know if you've been to Joburg, but not every place in Joburg is the friendliest or safest neighborhood. And we certainly were in some sketchy places, from right down in the heart of where the worst riots sort of in Joburg ever happened. It's a good place to stage a riot for a film, so we did that. We also worked in what was Danward's Den in the film, which is an old power station that has people have gone in and they've stripped away the steel because they can sell it. 2 months after we finished shooting, the whole building collapsed. It doesn't exist anymore. We were walking around with hard hats and the structural engineers making sure it's not going to fall on us. So it was pretty interesting. For me, my big thing that I was there for, aside from trying to get what we needed back at home, was really story first, and being sort of a creative partner with Neil and really looking for ways to help sell Chappie's character and his performance. And one of the things I encouraged a lot was an incredible amount of interaction. Really encouraging Neil and Charles to get Chappie to interact with his environment, like touch everything he can touch. The other cast members, hug him, hold him, grab him, throw him down, whatever, like as much of that interaction, which typically you try to avoid because it does create problems and it is very challenging. But because he was such an important character, I felt that he really needed to feel just as present as anyone else in the cast. So we shouldn't be cutting any corners anywhere in terms of what he's allowed to do. He should be allowed to do the same thing any other cast member is allowed to do. And it was interesting, in an interview with Hugh Jackman, he really commented that it felt like a visual effects film that wasn't visual effects. Like he just said it felt like normal shooting, which was cool. It means that we did our job well on set and we weren't intrusive. And hopefully we got what we needed to get, which was a huge amount of data. Thousands upon thousands of reference images, which Matthias will go into, and how he used tons of these references of Chappie, you know, hundreds of HDRIs. The HDRIs we did were a little bit different. It wasn't just your standard run in, take a snap. We would do a multiple height picture, which is starting to become more traditional, so you can triangulate between the two HDRIs, and you can actually map the entire room out in this space, proximity of light. And the other thing that was big for me is a sense of a lighting volume, as opposed to just sort of a single point that's sourced out. So anytime Chappie moved through the scene, you know, if he walked along a path, or I would take multiple HDRIs all along his path of walking, and then these would later be stitched together, which you'll hear about from Mark, and reprojected back into the room, so that proximity and lighting volume existed back on Chappie as if he was on set. It's a very subtle nuance, but it really helped to ground him into the set and into the volume of light. Obviously lots of measurements, photogrammetry of everything we could. We had the gray suits obviously on set, performing, whether it was Charlton or stunt guys, and we'll get into what these are for, but for us they were great lighting reference, and again, something for interaction that would then help us, because it was encouraging so much interaction. It was important that, you know, people weren't putting their hands through Chappie, and that they were going to be roughly where they should be. Post ended, or production ended, we headed back for post. Earl will get into the details of this, but we had to do 900 post-vid shots, which is a lot. It was pretty full on, it was pretty intense, but it was a huge win-win for everyone on the show, both for Image and for production, because we knew that going in that Chappie was going to have, he's a living, evolving character, so to speak. You know, you're seeing the battery stuff going by, huge amount of continuity. Like every single shot of Chappie had to be mapped out so that battery level was appropriate and the continuity mapped through the entire show. So that's 1,000 shots to make sure that battery level's right. His damage is damaged throughout the course of the thing. So having such early access to the entire film, like right out of the gate, we were able to be incredibly proactive on this film, as opposed to the traditional reactive nature of visual effects. And then obviously editorial got to cut with something that was a far more representative shot than just Charlton in a gray suit. It was a long, lean crew, roughly 11 months, and we hardly had any design surprises. And again, part of that was this super early design phase that we got to do before production, and then all the post-vid shots. Really the only thing that changed, that was sort of a curveball, so to speak, was we added a speaker to his mouth. Incredibly minor. Typically you've got so many surprises that come up, and we're really able to avoid that, so it was great. Quick flash for me, and then over to Matthias to really get into the nut and bolts of sort of the look dev.